What would you do if you found a German shepherd sitting motionless at his owner's grave for 7 days straight, refusing to eat, drink, or leave no matter what anyone tried? That's exactly what happened when Navy SEAL veteran Axel Thompson was called to help with Max, a 9-year-old military working dog whose Vietnam War veteran owner had just passed away, leaving behind a bond so strong that death couldn't break it. But what Vietnam veteran Bobby Sullivan had hidden from everyone, including his own family, would reveal the most heartbreaking military secret imaginable and prove that some friendships are literally worth dying for. This is the true story of a final goodbye that lasted 50 years, a loyal companion who chose love over survival, and the moment when "Come home, Max" became the 3 words that would either save a hero's life or honor his choice to join his fallen brother. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments, and if you believe that true loyalty knows no boundaries, not even death, hit that like button. You're going to need every bit of faith you have for this one. Now let's begin. The call came from Father Mackenzie at St. Mary's Catholic Church in Kalispell at 6:43 a.m. on a gray Thursday morning in October. "Axel, I need your help with something I've never dealt with in 30 years of ministry." The priest's voice carried the weight of someone witnessing something that challenged his understanding of grief and loyalty. "What's the situation, Father?" Axel Thompson asked, immediately alert. His thick, dark beard was still unkempt from sleep, his weathered military features hardening with the focus that came from years of emergency response calls. "It's Max, Robert Sullivan's German shepherd. Bobby passed away 6 days ago, and Max, he won't leave the graveside. He hasn't eaten, hasn't moved more than a few feet, and he's just waiting." Axel knew Bobby Sullivan by reputation, a Vietnam War veteran who'd lived alone on the outskirts of town with only his German shepherd companion. Sullivan had been one of those quiet heroes who never talked about his service, never attended veteran events, and preferred the solitude that many combat veterans found necessary for peace. "Has anyone tried to move Max?" His nephew tried yesterday. "Max isn't aggressive, but he simply won't budge. It's like he's made a decision to stay with Bobby no matter what. Axel, if this continues, Max is going to die at that grave." Scout, Ranger, and Angel, the Midnight Brotherhood, were already at the door with their tactical harnesses. They seemed to sense that this call was different from their usual search and rescue missions. This was about something deeper than physical rescue. The drive to St. Mary's Cemetery took 20 minutes through Montana's autumn landscape. As Axel approached Section C, where the newest graves were located, he could see Max from 200 yards away, a large German shepherd sitting at perfect military attention beside a fresh headstone. The scene was heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time. Max sat motionless as a statue, facing Bobby Sullivan's headstone with the kind of unwavering focus that spoke of absolute devotion. His coat was still clean and well-maintained, but Axel could see the signs of a dog who hadn't eaten in days. Slightly sunken sides, prominent ribcage, the hollow look around his eyes that came from grief-induced starvation. "Max," Axel called softly as he approached, using the calm tone that had gained the trust of countless animals in distress. Max acknowledged Axel's presence with a brief glance, but didn't move from his position beside the grave. His amber eyes held intelligence, awareness, and something else, a quiet resolution that suggested he'd made peace with a decision that others might not understand. Scout, Ranger, and Angel approached more cautiously, their professional instincts telling them they were in the presence of profound grief. They positioned themselves at respectful distances, not intruding, but offering silent support. Axel knelt beside Max and read the headstone. Robert Bobby Sullivan, Vietnam veteran, 1951-2024. "Until we meet again, old friend." "He was your whole world, wasn't he, boy?" Axel said gently, reaching out to stroke Max's head. The dog allowed the contact but remained focused on the grave. That's when Father Mackenzie approached with Bobby's nephew, David Sullivan, a man in his 40s who looked like he'd been crying for days. "Thank you for coming," David said. "Uncle Bobby always said if anything happened to him, Max should go to the animal shelter, but I can't force him away from Bobby's grave. They were together for 9 years. Bobby rescued Max from a shelter when he was just a puppy, and they never spent a day apart." "What can you tell me about their relationship?" Axel asked. Uncle Bobby was different after Vietnam. He had nightmares, didn't trust people easily, preferred to be alone. But with Max, he was the man he probably was before the war. They did everything together, hunting, fishing, just sitting on the porch. Bobby used to say Max was the only one who understood his silence. As David spoke, Axel noticed something that would change everything about the situation. Beside Bobby's grave, partially hidden by funeral flowers, was a small metal object. When he looked closer, he realized it was a military dog tag, not Bobby's, but another tag that read, Rex, Military Working Dog, Vietnam 1970-1971. David, who was Rex? David's face went pale. I don't know. Uncle Bobby never mentioned having a dog in Vietnam. Father Mackenzie looked puzzled. Bobby never talked about his military service. All we knew was that he served one tour and came home changed. But Axel was beginning to understand something that explained Max's behavior. This wasn't just about a pet losing his owner. This was about a promise that had been kept for over 50 years. Max isn't just grieving Bobby, Axel realized. He's standing guard. Bobby told him to stay, and he's going to stay until he gets different orders. That's when David pulled out a manila envelope that Bobby had left with his attorney. Bobby left instructions that this should be given to whoever came to help Max. I haven't opened it. Inside the envelope was a letter in Bobby's handwriting and a military photograph that would explain everything. To whoever finds Max at my grave, this is the hardest letter I've ever written. But if you're reading it, it means my final mission is complete, and my faithful companion needs someone who understands what loyalty really means. In Vietnam, I had a German Shepherd partner named Rex. On March 15, 1971, during our final patrol, Rex saved my squad from an ambush by detecting enemy positions we never would have seen. He took 3 bullets meant for me and died in my arms. As Rex was dying, I made him a promise. I'll find you again, boy. Whatever it takes, wherever you are, I'll find you. 9 years ago, when I found Max at that shelter, I knew. Same markings, same eyes, same spirit. Rex had come back to me. Now it's my time to keep the promise Rex kept for 50 years. Max knows I'm waiting for him, just like I waited for Rex to find me again. Don't force him away from my grave. If he chooses to stay, honor that choice. Some bonds are stronger than death, and some promises take a lifetime to keep. But if Max decides to live, please make sure he knows he's still loved, still needed, and still the best soldier I ever served with. Until we're all together again, Bobby Sullivan and Rex. Axel looked at Max, still maintaining his vigil beside Bobby's grave, and realized he wasn't dealing with a grieving pet. He was dealing with a warrior saying goodbye to his fallen brother. Reading Bobby Sullivan's letter changed everything about Max's behavior. This wasn't a confused pet refusing to accept death. This was a military working dog completing his final mission. My God, David Sullivan whispered, staring at the photograph of his uncle with Rex in Vietnam. Uncle Bobby never told us about Rex. He never talked about losing a partner in the war. Father Mackenzie studied the image, a young Bobby Sullivan in military fatigues kneeling beside a German Shepherd that looked identical to Max. The resemblance is extraordinary. But Axel was focused on Max, whose behavior now made perfect military sense. The dog wasn't just sitting by Bobby's grave, he was maintaining an honor guard position, the same stance military working dogs held during memorial services. Max, Axel said, using the command voice he'd learned during his SEAL years. At ease, soldier. For the first time in 6 days, Max shifted position slightly, acknowledging the military command while maintaining his vigil. Scout, Ranger, and Angel moved closer, sensing that this was a moment requiring their support. They positioned themselves in their protective triangle formation around Max, not to guard against threats, but to honor a fellow warrior's final duty. Over the following days, Axel established a routine of visiting Max at Bobby's grave. He brought water and food, which Max would accept minimally, just enough to maintain his strength for his vigil, but clearly not enough to sustain life long term. He's slowly dying of grief, Dr. Sarah Martinez observed during one of her veterinary assessments. His vital signs are stable, but he's made a conscious decision to fast. Animals don't typically do this unless they're responding to deep psychological trauma. Or unless they're following orders, Axel replied, watching Max maintain his perfect military posture despite his weakening condition. It was during the second week of Max's vigil that something extraordinary happened. Eleanor Hayes, the elderly woman who lived nearest to the cemetery, approached Axel with information that would deepen the mystery of Max and Bobby's connection. "I've been watching that dog every day," she said, her voice carrying the tremor of someone who'd witnessed something that challenged her understanding of reality. At exactly 6:17 every evening, Max gets up and walks to the cemetery entrance, sits there for 30 minutes, then returns to the grave. What happens at 6:17? That's when Bobby used to come home from town every day. For 9 years, Max would wait at that exact spot for Bobby to arrive. Even though Bobby's gone, Max is still keeping their appointment. Axel followed Mrs. Hayes' observation that evening and watched Max perform the ritual she'd described. At precisely 6:17 p.m., the German Shepherd rose from his vigil, walked to the cemetery entrance with purposeful steps, and sat facing the road in the exact position a dog would assume when waiting for his owner's return. After 30 minutes, Max returned to Bobby's grave and resumed his honor guard position. He's not just grieving, Axel realized. He's maintaining their entire routine, hoping Bobby will come back. But it was the discovery of Bobby's military records that revealed the full depth of the connection between Max and Rex. Working through Veteran Affairs channels, Axel obtained Bobby's complete service history and found details that made the hair on his arms stand up. Rex had been killed on March 15, 1971, at exactly 6:17 p.m. Vietnam time. Max had been born on March 15, 2015, at exactly 6:17 p.m. Montana time, 44 years to the minute after Rex's death. The mathematical impossibility of the coincidence was staggering, but there was more. Rex's final act before dying had been to crawl to Bobby's position and place his head on his handler's chest, the same position Max assumed every night at Bobby's grave before sleeping. Rex had been trained to detect explosive devices and had saved Bobby's squad by alerting to hidden dangers. Max had an uncanny ability to sense when Bobby was having Vietnam flashbacks and would immediately move to comfort him. Rex had been known for his refusal to leave wounded soldiers behind. Max had twice prevented Bobby from taking his own life during his darkest moments with PTSD. The behavioral parallels are beyond coincidence, Dr. Martinez admitted after reviewing both dogs' documented behaviors. It's like Max inherited Rex's specific protective instincts toward Bobby. By the third week of Max's vigil, word had spread throughout the veteran community. Vietnam veterans from across Montana began making pilgrimages to St. Mary's Cemetery to pay respects to both Bobby and Max. "That dog is showing more honor than most humans," said Frank Morrison, a Marine who'd served in the same region as Bobby. "In Vietnam, we had a saying, 'Leave no one behind.' Max is living that code." The visiting veterans would approach Max with military respect, many leaving small tokens, challenge coins, military patches, photos of their own fallen comrades. Max would acknowledge each visitor with a brief glance, but never broke his vigil. It was during one of these visits that 78-year-old Army veteran James Chen made an observation that changed Axel's understanding of what Max was truly doing. "Son," Chen said to Axel while watching Max maintain his position, "I've seen this before. In Korea, we had a dog named Duke who did the same thing when his handler was killed. Duke wasn't grieving. He was standing watch until relieved of duty." Relieved by whom? By the next soldier in the chain of command. Duke was waiting for someone with authority to tell him his mission was complete. That evening, as Axel sat beside Max at Bobby's grave, he began to understand that this wasn't about forcing Max to live or letting him die. This was about a military working dog who needed to be properly relieved of duty by someone with the authority to end his mission. Max wasn't just Bobby Sullivan's pet. He was Rex, completing a 50-year mission of protecting his handler. And until someone with military authority formally released him from that duty, Max would continue his vigil until death. The question was, who had the authority to relieve a warrior who had been serving faithfully for over 5 decades? The breakthrough came when Axel contacted the Vietnam Veterans of America organization and explained Max's situation to Colonel Patricia Williams, the same Master Sergeant who had worked with Luna's legacy but was now retired and serving as a veterans advocate. "Axel," she said over the secure video call, "what you're describing isn't just remarkable, it's unprecedented. A military working dog maintaining duty posture for 3 weeks while fasting. That level of discipline suggests training that goes beyond normal canine protocols. Colonel, I need someone with military authority to formally relieve Max of duty. He's dying by choice because no one has told him his mission is complete. I'll be there tomorrow. But it was what happened that night that would prove Max's connection to Rex beyond any doubt. At 3:17 a.m., exactly 9 hours after his daily 6:17 p.m. ritual, Max did something he hadn't done since Bobby's death. He began barking. Not the distressed barking of a grieving animal, but the sharp, purposeful, alert bark of a military working dog detecting a threat. Axel, who had been sleeping in his truck to monitor Max's condition, immediately woke to see Max standing at rigid attention, staring into the darkness beyond the cemetery perimeter. Scout, Ranger, and Angel, who had been taking shifts to keep Max company, immediately moved to tactical positions. Their behavior confirmed that whatever Max was detecting, it was real. Moving carefully through the cemetery with his tactical flashlight, Axel discovered what had triggered Max's alert: 2 men attempting to vandalize veterans' graves, including Bobby's. The men were spray painting anti-military graffiti on headstones and had started toward Bobby's grave when Max's barking alerted them to his presence. "Just a stupid dog," one of the vandals said. "He's been here for weeks, probably half dead anyway." But as they approached Bobby's grave with their spray paint, Max did something that stopped them cold. The German shepherd, weakened from weeks of fasting, somehow found the strength to position himself directly over Bobby's headstone in a protective stance that would have made any military working dog handler proud. His message was clear: "You'll have to go through me." The vandals, confronted by a dog whose eyes held the unmistakable intensity of a trained warrior, decided to flee rather than face whatever consequences might come from a German shepherd who clearly had nothing left to lose. Max maintained his protective position until the threats were gone, then slowly returned to his vigil beside the grave, but not before completing one final action that made Axel's throat tighten with emotion. The weakened dog carefully used his paws to brush away dirt and debris that had accumulated on Bobby's headstone during his 3-week vigil, cleaning the memorial with the same attention to detail a soldier would show when maintaining a fallen comrade's grave marker. "Good boy, Rex," Axel whispered, using the name from Vietnam for the first time. Mission accomplished. The next morning, Colonel Williams arrived with an official military honor guard from the Montana National Guard. What followed was a ceremony that would be remembered by everyone present as one of the most moving military honors ever conducted. "Max," Colonel Williams said, approaching the German shepherd with full military bearing, "by the authority vested in me by the United States military, and in recognition of your faithful service to Staff Sergeant Robert Sullivan and your distinguished conduct during the Vietnam War as military working dog Rex, you are hereby officially relieved of duty." Max looked up at Colonel Williams with eyes that seemed to recognize military authority. "Your mission is complete, soldier. You have served with honor, distinction, and unwavering loyalty. Staff Sergeant Sullivan's position is secure, and you are free to stand down." For the first time in 21 days, Max rose from his vigil position. But instead of walking away from Bobby's grave, he did something that brought tears to every person present. Max approached Colonel Williams, sat at attention, and offered a military salute, placing his right paw over his heart in the gesture Bobby had taught him years earlier. "At ease, Max," Colonel Williams said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Welcome home, soldier." Only then did Max accept the food and water that Axel offered. Only then did he allow himself to be led away from Bobby's grave for medical care. But the most extraordinary moment came that evening, when Max was recovering at Dr. Martinez's veterinary clinic. At exactly 6:17 p.m., Max looked toward the window facing the cemetery, made a soft sound that seemed to say goodbye, and for the first time since Bobby's death, lay down to rest without maintaining his vigil position. "He's released himself from duty," Dr. Martinez observed. "Whatever hold that grave had on him, it's broken." 3 days later, Max was healthy enough to leave the clinic. David Sullivan had assumed Max would come live with his family, but Max had different plans. The German shepherd walked directly to Axel's truck and sat beside it with the patient expression of a military working dog awaiting orders from his new commanding officer. "I think he's choosing his next assignment," Colonel Williams said with a smile. Rex served one handler faithfully for 50 years. Maybe it's time for him to serve another. Axel looked at Max, or Rex, or whatever combination of both he truly was, and saw in his eyes the same intelligence, loyalty, and warrior spirit that had made him legendary in Vietnam and devoted in Montana. "What do you think, Max? Ready for a new mission?" Max barked once, the sharp affirmative bark of a soldier accepting orders. The final goodbye to Bobby Sullivan was complete, but Max's story was just beginning. Part 4. A new mission begins. 6 months after Max officially joined the Midnight Brotherhood, the German Shepherd who had once been Rex had found his purpose in a new kind of service, one that honored both his military past and his future as a guardian of those in need. The integration wasn't immediate. Max carried 50 years of military discipline and trauma that needed careful handling. But under Axel Thompson's guidance, supported by Scout, Ranger, and Angel, Max began to heal from both his recent grief and decades of stored combat memories. "He's different from the others," Dr. Sarah Martinez observed during one of Max's regular checkups. "He has the tactical awareness of a seasoned operator, but the gentleness of a therapy dog. It's like he's learned to balance warrior instincts with healing presence." The breakthrough came during their first official mission together, a search and rescue operation for a missing 82-year-old Korean War veteran who had wandered away from his assisted living facility during a PTSD episode. While Scout, Ranger, and Angel used their traditional search patterns, Max did something extraordinary. Instead of following the scent trail, he led the team directly to the location where the missing veteran would most likely go during a combat flashback, an old bunker-like structure in the Montana hills that reminded him of his wartime service. They found Edward Kim huddled in the abandoned building, reliving memories from 1952 Korea, calling for his lost squad members and convinced he was still under enemy fire. When Scout, Ranger, and Angel approached, Kim became more agitated, seeing them as threats in his confused mental state. But when Max approached, something remarkable happened. The old Korean War veteran looked into Max's eyes and saw something that transcended species. He saw another warrior who understood the weight of service, the burden of survival, and the challenge of coming home from war. "You served too, didn't you, boy?" Kim whispered, reaching out to touch Max's head. Max responded by lying down beside the elderly veteran and resting his head on Kim's chest, the same comforting gesture he had used with Bobby Sullivan during his worst PTSD episodes. For the first time in hours, Edward Kim stopped reliving 1952 and returned to the present moment. "I think I'm ready to go home now," he said quietly to Axel. "This old soldier here reminded me that the war's over." That rescue established Max's new specialty within the Midnight Brotherhood, working with military veterans suffering from combat trauma, PTSD, and the isolation that often came with service-related psychological wounds. Over the following months, Max became legendary in the veteran community for his ability to reach soldiers that traditional therapy couldn't help. There was James Rodriguez, a Gulf War veteran who hadn't spoken to his family in 15 years due to PTSD-related anger issues. Max spent 3 weeks simply sitting beside Rodriguez during his daily walks, never demanding interaction, but always present. Eventually, Rodriguez began talking to Max about experiences he'd never shared with humans, and through Max, he found his way back to his family. There was Maria Santos, a female Iraq war veteran dealing with military sexual trauma who couldn't trust anyone, especially men in authority positions. Max somehow sensed her specific trauma and always positioned himself between Santos and any males in group therapy sessions, providing the protection she needed to begin healing. And there was David Chen, a young Afghanistan veteran contemplating suicide who called Axel at 3 a.m. saying he couldn't live with his survivor's guilt anymore. Max rode with Axel to Chen's apartment and spent the entire night lying across Chen's lap, his presence somehow communicating that survival wasn't something to feel guilty about. It was something to honor through continued service to others. Max isn't just a therapy dog, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the VA psychologist who worked with their program, observed. He's a translator between the civilian world and the warrior mindset. Veterans trust him because he carries the same burden they do. But it was the annual Memorial Day ceremony at St. Mary's Cemetery that showed how completely Max had transformed his grief into purpose. Returning to Bobby Sullivan's grave for the first time since his vigil, Max approached the headstone not with the rigid posture of military duty, but with the gentle respect of a friend visiting a friend. He placed a small American flag that he'd been trained to carry at the base of Bobby's headstone, then sat quietly for exactly 30 minutes, not in vigil, but in remembrance. When the ceremony ended, Max walked to the cemetery's memorial wall where the names of local veterans were engraved. Using a skill Axel had taught him, Max placed small flags at the base of the memorial for each veteran who had died alone or forgotten, ensuring that no warrior's sacrifice went unacknowledged. He's turned his understanding of loss into a mission to prevent other veterans from facing what Bobby faced, Axel realized, watching Max complete his memorial duties with the precision of a soldier and the heart of a healer. The Max Project, as it became known, expanded into a comprehensive program serving veterans across the Pacific Northwest. Max trained other dogs and handlers in techniques for reaching combat veterans, while continuing his own work with the most difficult cases. But the most important moment came during a quiet evening at Axel's cabin, 18 months after Max had ended his vigil at Bobby's grave. As the sun set over the Montana mountains, Max was lying peacefully by the fireplace with Scout, Ranger, and Angel in their familiar formation. For the first time since joining the family, Max began making the soft melodic sounds that were the Midnight Brotherhood's signature, their song of comfort for those who needed hope. Emma Chen Thompson, Axel's adopted daughter, looked up from her homework and smiled. Max is singing with them now. That means he's home. Axel looked at the German Shepherd who had once been Rex, then became Bobby's faithful companion, then chose to be part of something larger than any single bond. "Yes, sweetheart," Axel replied. "He's finally home." Because sometimes the greatest honor we can give to those we've lost isn't to die with them, but to live in ways that make their sacrifice meaningful. Sometimes the final goodbye isn't an ending. It's a transformation from one kind of service to another. And sometimes the most loyal thing you can do for a fallen brother is to find new brothers to serve alongside. For Bobby Sullivan and Rex, whose 50-year bond proves that some friendships transcend life and death. For Max, who learned that the best way to honor the dead is by serving the living. For every veteran who struggles with the weight of service and survival, your brothers are still fighting alongside you in forms you might not expect. For the Max Project, which has helped 247 combat veterans find their way from surviving to thriving. Welcome to the next chapter of the Midnight Brotherhood, where warriors help warriors, and no one has to face their battles alone. One vigil that ended in hope rather than death. One choice to serve rather than surrender. One dog who proved that the strongest bonds aren't broken by death, they're transformed by love into something that helps others live. Max's final goodbye became his first hello to a new mission, making sure no veteran ever has to face their darkness alone. We want to hear what you felt while listening to this story. Don't forget to comment and rate the story out of 10.